The first sign that something was wrong came not with shouting, not with threats, but with the dull, sickening sound of a body tumbling down wooden steps. I froze halfway out of my Jeep, grocery bags clutched tightly in one hand, car keys dangling from the other. Time seemed to slow as my brain struggled to process the impossible scene unfolding in front of me. Emily, my wife, my anchor, and the future mother of our daughter, was falling. She twisted midair, instinctively cradling her rounded belly as she hit the stone walkway with a sickening thud. The tangled string of multicolored Christmas lights she had been hanging minutes earlier now wrapped around her legs like mocking shackles, strewn across the concrete like the debris of a wreck. At the top of the porch stairs stood Karen Whitmore, perfectly coiffed, untouched by the November wind, clad in a cashmere coat worth more than my monthly salary. Her manicured hands still extended from the shove she had just delivered. Her face bore a twisted smirk of satisfaction. I dropped everything. Groceries spilled, oranges rolling down the driveway. Car keys clattered somewhere into the grass. None of it mattered. Only Emily mattered. I sprinted, adrenaline surging, heart hammering, world narrowing to a single point. The fragile figure curled on the ground. "Emily!" I shouted, skidding to my knees beside her. Her face was pale, twisted in pain, but she was conscious, clutching protectively at her stomach. I touched her arm, scanning, assessing, my emergency training kicking in like a second skin. Airway clear. Breathing shallow but steady. Bleeding, a small trickle from her forehead, but not catastrophic. "My back," she whispered, voice trembling. "The baby." Panic, cold and absolute, lanced through me. I buried it ruthlessly. "You're going to be okay," I said, forcing my voice into a steady calm, the voice I had used calling in medevac flights under enemy fire. "The baby's going to be okay. I'm calling for help." I fumbled for my phone, thumbed 911 with trembling hands. While the dispatcher calmly took details, I heard the sharp, clipped footsteps of Karen descending the stairs. "You need to take those lights down," she snapped, ignoring Emily entirely. "You're in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA Code. Unauthorized decorations. Fine starts today." I turned, still kneeling beside my wife, and looked at her. I had faced insurgents, cartels, dictators with blood on their hands. None of them had ever ignited in me the pure, incandescent fury I felt looking at Karen Whitmore. "You assaulted my wife," I said, my voice low, steady, lethal. "On our property. While she's 7 months pregnant." Karen scoffed, flipping her clipboard with a practiced air of superiority. She tripped. "You'll have to deal with the fines regardless." Above us, unnoticed by her, the small black lens of our doorbell camera blinked, silently recording. And in that moment, I made a decision. This was not going to be another case of a bully walking away untouched. Not this time. Not with my family. Not in my home. The first rumble of engines on the horizon was almost imperceptible, but it was coming. Help was coming. And this time, it would not be the kind of help Karen Whitmore could intimidate, threaten, or buy off. The first military vehicle appeared around the bend of Maple Lane just as the last notes of Karen Whitmore's tirade rang through the air. A Humvee, olive drab and dust-streaked, barreled down the pristine suburban street with a low, menacing growl. Behind it followed another. And another. Karen stopped mid-sentence, blinking as if the very fabric of her universe had shifted. Across the street, blinds twitched. Garage doors cracked open. Neighbors who had been too cowed by HOA threats for years now peered out, drawn by the unmistakable sight, the United States Army rolling into Evergreen Heights. I didn't move from Emily's side. I kept my hand firmly on hers, feeling the faint but steady pulse beneath her skin, the stubborn life force of both her and our unborn daughter. The rumble grew louder. A convoy was coming, not just a few vehicles, but an entire battalion segment. Transport trucks, armored ambulances, medical jeeps. Soldiers in cold-weather tactical gear jumped down before the engines even cooled, forming efficient squads, scanning, securing the area with silent professionalism. From the lead vehicle stepped General William Iron Bill Thompson himself, my former CO, a living legend in special operations circles. He moved like a glacier, deliberate, unstoppable. General Thompson didn't look at Karen, didn't acknowledge her sputtered protests. Instead, he crossed the lawn directly to me, dropping to one knee beside Emily without hesitation. "Dr. Walker," he said in a low voice filled with genuine concern, "we've got you." Emily blinked up at him, dazed but smiling faintly. A medic was already kneeling on her other side, beginning to check her vitals with swift, practiced hands. Karen found her voice again. You You can't bring military vehicles onto private residential streets, she screeched, clipboard quivering in her fist. This is a violation of. I demand you remove them immediately. You are trespassing. General Thompson rose to his full, imposing height. He turned, faced her squarely. Ma'am, he said, voice dangerously soft. One of my officers' wives, 7 months pregnant, has been assaulted. On private property. My priority is their safety, not your lawn. Karen's face darkened an alarming shade of red. Still, she pressed forward, a cornered bureaucrat clinging desperately to the last scraps of perceived power. This is outrageous, she shouted. I am the president of this community. I will have your entire battalion reprimanded, sued, disbanded. General Thompson tilted his head, considering her with a faint smile. Feel free, he said mildly. But first, maybe you should talk to the county sheriff. At his signal, 2 squad cars rolled up behind the military convoy, blue lights flashing. Deputies climbed out, hands resting casually near their belts, a silent message. This was no longer a dispute. It was a crime scene. One deputy, a broad-shouldered man with mirrored sunglasses, stepped forward. Karen Whitmore, he said, voice neutral. Yes, she barked, assuming authority. You're under investigation for assault causing bodily harm to a pregnant woman, he continued smoothly. We have eyewitness accounts, doorbell camera footage, and sworn testimony. Karen's mouth fell open, soundless. This is insane, she hissed. I barely touched her. She tripped over those ridiculous decorations. The deputy pulled a tablet from his cruiser, thumbed a few buttons, and held it up. Clear as day, the video feed from our doorbell camera. Karen's hand pushing against Emily's chest. Emily's body recoiling, falling backward. The sickening moment of impact. No room for interpretation. Karen's hands dropped to her sides, clipboard forgotten. For the first time, real fear flickered in her heavily mascaraed eyes. She knew. She knew she was cornered. And the consequences were just beginning. Across the street, more neighbors gathered. Ellen Reeves, David Hahn, the Patel family, people who had lived in Karen's shadow for years. They watched in silence, faces a mixture of horror, curiosity, and something else blooming quietly beneath the surface. Hope. Hope that the reign of terror was ending. The medics finished stabilizing Emily onto a stretcher. I kissed her forehead gently as they lifted her into the military ambulance, securing her for transport to Mercy General Hospital. You ride with her, General Thompson said, clapping my shoulder. We'll clean up here. Sir, I said, voice thick with gratitude. As I climbed into the ambulance, Karen made one last desperate lunge toward the stretcher. You can't let this happen, she shrieked, voice breaking. You're ruining everything. The general caught her by the elbow, not roughly, but firmly. You did that yourself, Ms. Whitmore, he said. The doors closed between us, muffling her cries. The ambulance pulled away, convoy parting like a living river to let us pass. As we left Evergreen Heights behind, sirens wailing, I glanced back once. Karen Whitmore stood frozen in the middle of the street, alone now. No army of clipboard-wielding intimidation could save her. No banking connections could erase what she had done. Justice, real justice, was finally coming. And this was just the beginning. The sterile, humming calm of Mercy General's maternity ward was a world away from the chaos we had just left behind. Emily lay resting in a private room, monitors gently tracking her vitals and the tiny, steady heartbeat of our daughter. I sat beside her bed, holding her hand, watching the soft rise and fall of her chest with the fierce protectiveness of a man who had nearly lost everything in a heartbeat. She was safe. Our baby was safe. For now. But Evergreen Heights was not. And neither was the truth. It was 2 days later, after Emily had been discharged with strict orders for bed rest, that the first cracks in Karen Whitmore's empire began to split wide open. It started with a knock at our door. Ellen Reeves stood on our porch, casserole dish in hand, her husband David hovering behind her awkwardly. They looked uncertain, even a little afraid, as if stepping onto our property was an act of rebellion. I opened the door, stepping out to meet them. We wanted to say thank you, Ellen said, voice barely above a whisper, for standing up to her. I glanced past them. Across the street, curtains shifted. Other neighbors lingered nearby, pretending to rake leaves or walk dogs, watching, waiting. She's been terrorizing us for years, Ellen continued, glancing over her shoulder nervously. But after what she did to Emily, people are ready. They want to talk. I nodded once. Then let's talk. We gathered that night in my garage, the only place where people felt safe enough to speak freely. One by one, stories spilled out. How Karen had weaponized the HOA, not to protect property values but to consolidate power. Finding families she didn't like for imagined violations. Threatening foreclosure proceedings against those who protested. Leaning on her husband's influence at the bank to squeeze refinancing deals until people gave up and moved away. She made us believe we were powerless, David said bitterly. That she controlled everything. She does control a lot, muttered Mr. Patel, arms crossed. Or she did. That's when Ellen leaned forward, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. There's more, she said. Something none of us could prove before. I frowned. What? She hesitated, glancing around as if afraid Karen might materialize from the shadows. The parkland, she said finally. The greenbelt lot behind the playground. I nodded. It was a beloved spot, swings, a little footbridge, walking paths winding under old oak trees. She sold part of it, Ellen said, voice trembling with suppressed rage. Without the community's vote. She filed fake meeting minutes with the county records office. Sold it to a shell company that's building a private estate for herself. Silence fell like a hammer. The implications spiraled through my mind. Fraud. Embezzlement. Abuse of authority. Proof, if we could find it, that would not just remove Karen Whitmore from power, but dismantle everything she had built. And it would all be legal. Public. Unstoppable. I stayed up that night, the old instincts kicking in. Strategic planning, resource allocation, contingency preparation. This wasn't just a neighborhood squabble anymore. This was a battlefield. And it was time to fight. By dawn, I had a plan. Step 1. Gather evidence. Step 2. Build a coalition. Step 3. Deliver the blow in a way Karen couldn't counter, couldn't smear, couldn't wriggle out of. I contacted a friend from my logistics network, Jenna Hayes, now a forensic auditor specializing in HOA and municipal fraud. Within hours, she confirmed the shell company's ownership tied back to an alias linked to Karen's brother-in-law. A paper trail that was sloppy, arrogant, and damning. Meanwhile, neighbors rallied. Old rivalries faded. Fear melted into simmering resolve. The same families Karen had divided for years now stood shoulder to shoulder, parents pushing strollers alongside retired veterans, young couples fresh from their starter homes, lifelong residents with weathered hands and stubborn pride. We formed the Evergreen Restoration Committee, filed an emergency petition to recall the HOA leadership, drafted a formal complaint to the county inspector's office and the state attorney general. We weren't just taking back our homes. We were taking back our dignity. Karen must have sensed the shift in the air. 2 nights before the official vote, she staged a community meeting at the clubhouse, a last-ditch attempt to reassert her dominance. I attended. So did half the neighborhood. Karen stood at the podium, flanked by the few loyalists she had left, clipboard in hand, voice shrill with forced authority. These allegations, she spat, are baseless, slanderous, fabricated by disgruntled residents who want to undermine community standards. She sneered directly at me, led by individuals who think military force should replace governance. I stood slowly, letting the silence stretch. No, Karen, I said quietly, my voice carrying to the back of the room. Led by individuals who think leadership should mean service, not exploitation. I placed a thick manila folder on the podium, copies of the fraudulent deeds, the fake meeting records, the financial statements showing thousands siphoned into shell accounts. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face drained of color. Ellen stepped forward next, holding aloft a petition bearing over 90% of the neighborhood's signatures. David spoke for everyone when he said simply, "You're done." As we exited into the chilly night, I glanced up at the homes lining the cul-de-sac. Strings of Christmas lights, silver, gold, red, green, shone from every eave, unapproved, unapologetic. And for the first time in years, Evergreen Heights felt alive again. Karen Whitmore's reign was crumbling. But the real victory was still to come. Because once the courts got involved, once the state investigated the HOA's finances, the consequences would stretch far beyond a mere loss of title. For Karen Whitmore, the fall had only just begun. The summons was served at exactly 7:03 a.m. on a cold, brittle Wednesday morning. Karen Whitmore opened her door, still in her silk robe, hair in meticulous curlers, to find 2 uniformed deputies standing on her marble porch. Between them stood a process server holding a thick sheaf of documents. She barely had time to register the seal of the Commonwealth of Virginia before the first words struck her like a slap. Karen Elizabeth Whitmore, you are hereby notified of civil action pending against you by the residents of Evergreen Heights. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. This lawsuit alleges fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, embezzlement of HOA funds, and falsification of public records. The server placed the stack of papers squarely into her hands. The deputies remained at her sides, impassive. And just like that, the queen had been dethroned. I stood across the street, arms folded, watching. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk. Justice wasn't a performance. It was a process. A slow, relentless process that had finally begun moving against the tyrant who had lorded over this community for far too long. Behind me, a ripple of motion, neighbors emerging from doorways, driveways, sidewalks. A silent army, witnesses to a moment they had once thought impossible. Karen stumbled backward into her doorway, clutching the papers like they were a live grenade. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her. The beginning of her end. Within 48 hours, the news had spread beyond Evergreen Heights. The county investigation team, bolstered by forensic auditors and real estate specialists, raided the HOA office housed in the community center. Boxes of financial records, thumb drives, meeting minutes, and suspicious invoices were hauled out under heavy scrutiny. The preliminary findings were damning. Karen hadn't just abused her power, she had turned the HOA into her personal ATM. Fabricated maintenance contracts. Bogus beautification projects funneled to companies owned by relatives. Unauthorized sales of public green spaces to shell corporations she controlled. Every dollar, every shady signature, had left a trail. And now the state's attorney general was following it all the way to her front door. Karen tried to fight, of course. She hired an expensive legal team, filed countersuits, held a disastrous press conference where she blamed a coordinated smear campaign by radical elements. But Evergreen Heights wasn't buying it anymore. Not after years of intimidation, fear, and betrayal. Not after the footage, the documents, the testimonies. Not after what she did to Emily. The court hearings moved faster than anyone expected. Facing overwhelming evidence, Karen's lawyers advised her to settle, but her pride refused to bend. It shattered instead. The judge ordered a full financial accounting of the Evergreen Heights HOA under Karen's tenure. All accounts frozen. All assets audited. She was personally liable for over $1.2 million in misappropriated funds. Her home, the grand, cold mansion she had lorded over the neighborhood from, was seized to pay restitution. The private estate she had begun building on stolen Greenbelt land was ordered demolished and returned to public ownership. And in perhaps the most fitting twist of all, Karen Whitmore was permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in the state of Virginia. Ever. The final blow came quietly. One evening, as Emily and I sat on our porch, a rainbow of Christmas lights twinkling above us, a moving truck pulled up to Karen's house. No fanfare. No farewell party. Just a few battered boxes, hastily packed. A once imposing woman retreating under the cover of dusk, her empire reduced to rubble. Neighbors watched from lawns and sidewalks, not gloating, but bearing silent witness. It was over. Really over. But victory wasn't just removing Karen. Victory was rebuilding. In the months that followed, Evergreen Heights blossomed in ways I had never imagined possible. The new HOA board, led by people like Ellen, David, and Mr. Patel, rewrote the community charter from scratch. Gone were the absurd fines. Gone were the color-coded decorations lists, the arbitrary citations, the intimidation tactics. Instead, a new vision emerged. A community built on trust, respect, and shared responsibility. We reopened the park Karen had tried to steal, adding a small memorial plaque beneath the largest oak tree. For the families who reclaimed their home, we installed new playground equipment, planted community gardens, held monthly barbecues and outdoor movie nights. Children's laughter echoed through the cul-de-sac again, unburdened by the old, invisible chains. And every December, homes across Evergreen Heights exploded in color: silver, gold, red, green, blue. No permissions needed, no fines threatened. Just joy. Pure, unapologetic joy. Emily gave birth to our daughter, Eliana Grace Walker, on a crisp April morning. As I held her tiny, squalling body in my arms for the first time, I realized something profound. Home isn't just a house. Home is the people you fight for, the ground you defend, the community you build from broken pieces. Home is where hope lives. And we had built it together. 1 year later, the scars had faded, but the lessons remained. Evergreen Heights was no longer a place ruled by fear. It had become something rare, almost mythical, a true community. In the evenings, Emily and I would sit on the front porch, Eliana curled against her mother's chest, her tiny fists clenching and unclenching in sleep, and watched the neighborhood pulse with life. Children darted across front lawns, dragging kites and scooters in their wake. Neighbors gathered around fire pits, sharing stories and laughter that rippled under the stars. Holiday lights, wild, colorful, unapologetic, blinked from every rooftop regardless of season. It wasn't perfect. Nothing worth having ever was. But it was ours. Built not from fear, but from shared hope. Karen Whitmore became a ghost long before she ever left town. After the court rulings, after the lawsuits drained her accounts dry, she fled to a cramped apartment in a neighboring city, far from the manicured streets she once dominated. Occasionally, rumors drifted back, sightings of her working low-level administrative jobs, bitterly recounting her version of events to anyone who would listen. But the world had moved on without her. Evergreen Heights didn't hate her. We simply forgot her. She had become irrelevant to the future she had once tried to strangle. The playground stood as a living monument to that future. Beneath the towering oak tree at the heart of the park, families gathered every weekend. Children swung so high they touched the clouds. Teens played basketball until the streetlights blinked on. Retirees tended the community gardens, swapping homegrown vegetables and laughter in equal measure. And there, in a quiet corner shaded by ivy and honeysuckle, stood a weathered bench. A brass plaque was bolted to its back, simple but profound. In memory of those who believed home is worth fighting for. Every time I passed that bench, pushing Eliana in her stroller, I was reminded of the truth Emily had whispered to me long ago in the hospital. The storm had cleared the air, and what remained was stronger than anything that had come before. That December, Evergreen Heights held its second annual holiday festival. No color schemes, no approval forms, just homes bursting with color, creativity, and pride. The Johnsons built a massive, animatronic snowman army. The Patels created a dazzling light tunnel made entirely of recycled materials. The Reeves family's roof featured a sleigh that looked dangerously close to NASA engineering standards. As for our home, Emily and I, with a little help from a giggling Eliana, strung lights in every color imaginable, letting them spill over windows, porches, and trees like a river of captured stars. We didn't win any awards that year. No one did. Because the festival wasn't a competition anymore. It was a celebration. Of survival. Of community. Of the wild, messy, brilliant beauty that comes when people refuse to be ruled by fear. Sometimes, late at night when the world slept, I would sit alone on the porch, Eliana's soft breathing rising and falling from the baby monitor beside me. And I would look up at the blaze of colors arching across the street. Not just lights, but 1,000 tiny acts of defiance against darkness. Against bullies. Against everything that tried to turn neighbors into enemies and homes into prisons. Evergreen Heights wasn't just a name anymore. It was a promise. One we had fought for. One we had kept. And as long as laughter filled the air and lights danced across rooftops. As long as strangers still stopped to offer a hand instead of a citation. That promise would endure. Always.